Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of OneSoccer.ca. It's Andy Petrillo, Oliver Platt, Gareth Wheeler with you. And gentlemen, we're going to begin today with the recent controversy surrounding the upcoming friendly between the Canadian men and the team from Iran. Now, for those unfamiliar with the surrounding circumstances that has led to the game making headlines, I just wanted to give you a brief explanation. On January 8, 2020, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard shot down a passenger plane shortly after takeoff, killing everyone on board. And that included 85 Canadians. And the families of those Canadians say it's a slap in the face to grant visas to the Iranian players because they feel that by opening Canadian borders to the Iranian soccer team, it will normalize the relationship with the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're calling it sport washing. Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked about the decision to invite Iran to play in the friendly, and this was his response. He said, quote, "This was a choice by Soccer Canada. I think it wasn't a very good idea to invite the Iranian soccer team here to Canada, but that's something the organizers going to have to explain." So, of course, that comment prompted this response from Canada Soccer. At Canada Soccer, we believe in the power of sport and its ability to bring people from different backgrounds and political beliefs together for a common purpose. Iran is one of 32 participating member associations at the FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022, and Canada Soccer continues to follow all international protocols in staging this match. We're focused on preparations for our men's national team to compete on the world stage. So there's a lot to unpack here, guys. Obviously, we know this is very emotional. It's heartbreaking hearing what these families have had to endure since their loved ones were murdered. Call it what it was. And it's also understandable for many to see how sports organizations solely focus on the sport and, sometimes are unaware of the political strife that may be going on. I mean, case in point, when this game was announced, tickets, they sold out. We talked about it on our show from a strictly competitive perspective, whether or not Iran was a good opponent. And the conversation was all very much in this tunnel of sport. And then the question was posed to the prime minister. Couple that with his response, and Canadians are now reminded of that atrocity committed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. But I'll start with this, Gareth. Was Canada Soccer blindsided in many ways? Were they surprised by the backlash, but more so blindsided by Justin Trudeau's comments?
I'm guessing yes. Without anyone telling me that they were surprised, I'm assuming that they were, as Trudeau's comments came 5 days after this friendly was announced, when he was on the press junket on the East Coast and was asked by a reporter, basically out of nowhere, like, look, a lot is on the prime minister's plate right now. We understand Ukraine, COVID, inflation. There's a number of issues that are front and center. And to be honest, he's probably not thrilled that this Iranian situation that, continues to play out in the background has been brought into the public sight. So Canada Soccer would be surprised that it came up 5 days later, that it came out of the prime minister's mouth at that time. The fact that they had gone through all the steps that they needed to in order to have this approved, including the Canadian government granting the Iranian delegation that will be coming in June visas to enter the country. That's something that requires government approval before Canada rubber stamps going forward with the friendly. It's also approved by FIFA, obviously, which is important for any friendly to be played, that you need to play against a nation who's allowed to play by soccer's governing body. Right now, Russia isn't one of them. Iran will be playing in the World Cup. They will be one of 32 teams. They did go through World Cup qualifying. So Canada Soccer, in their eyes, they kind of went through all the steps in order to kind of push this forward. And the fact that this statement was released 5 days later would have probably caught them by surprise.
That's the thing. I think I would imagine the CSA was blindsided by the Prime Minister's comments. I have a very hard time believing that the government was blindsided by the fact that this match is being played and was announced. And, again, it would be very, very surprising to me if there wasn't an opportunity for the Canadian government to say, no, this isn't a good idea, we shouldn't do this, when the match was being arranged and before it was announced, and when that visa process and so on was happening. As opposed to a week later when they're asked about it by the media. So I understand in that position, the prime minister's put in a difficult spot, because he obviously does not want to sound like, as the leader of the country, that he is, endorsing the Iranian government in any way. And I understand that's a tricky one for him, but it did kind of feel like the CSA was thrown under the bus a little bit here for a match that has been in the planning for some time.
So we know that game is happening June 5th, the friendly for Canada against Iran. That will be shown right here on One Soccer. Why was Iran chosen, Ollie, as an opponent for a friendly here in preparation for the World Cup?
Well, I can go through from my perspective, and my perspective is very soccer oriented. I can go through a list of reasons why I think Canada's playing Iran, and it's legitimate to do so, right? Firstly, I think, you can criticize the CSA from a soccer perspective for not securing a better opponent. And I think we've said, Canada needs to play some stronger teams in upcoming windows. But there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Iran was selected because they felt that they were the best opponent that was available to them when all of the different factors were considered. And there was nothing more to it than that. It was purely a competitive decision. I can say from my perspective that I think I do still believe, and some people might think this is naive, but I do still believe that sports can be a force for good, in international competition can be a force for good in these different types of areas. I can say that I don't see Iranian soccer players in the national team as responsible for a horrific act that was committed by their government and their military. I personally don't see this as something that is, making any statement on the Iranian government or normalizing relations in any way. But that's my perspective. And you have to respect and appreciate in this case that there's a completely different perspective that is much more personal, coming from some people who have had the, unthinkable tragedy of losing family members in a horrific situation. And they're obviously going to have a completely different view of this. And so I think Canada Soccer and all of us as soccer fans who obviously want to see the team play matches, I think it's really important that they have to respect that, and they have to understand that, they're going to have to live with that, right? That some people, if this match goes ahead, some people aren't going to like it, and there's going to need to be consideration for that, and to do anything they can to kind of ease those fears. Certainly things you hear, like the idea that, members of the Iranian military could be with the team to escort them. That's absurd. That should not happen. And that's a government decision to not approve visas. But things like that, clearly we need to take steps to make sure that those kind of fears are eased. And, maybe there won't ever be a situation where everyone is comfortable with this match, but we can do things that at least, I think, make it a better situation than maybe is feared.
There's a lot to unpack there. First off, I think it's important to point out that I've been told that the National Guard, the Iranian National Guard, does not travel with the team. They would have had to be granted visas anyways by the Canadian government for them to enter. So that's what I've been told. Just to set that record straight. In fact, let's get into the reasons and how games like this are set up. So Canada preferred to host this game, or these two games, because the Curacao game as well. They wanted to host these games in Vancouver. Vancouver didn't have any World Cup qualifying games. We hope it's going to be a host city for the 2026 World Cup. They deserve a game. It's a chance to get a big crowd. The stadium's sold out, like BC Place. Big stadium. It's bigger than BMO Field in Toronto. So there's a lot of reasons that they wanted Vancouver. Unfortunately, staging games in Vancouver, especially when you're asking an opponent to come up for one game, that's it, in the Pacific Northwest, which is a long way away from Europe, South American destinations, like that requires a lot of travel. So that kind of limits the amount of opponents as well. And when you invite a team to come play, I mean, you can welcome Brazil or an Argentina to Canada, and nations like that certainly call the Canadian Soccer Association, but you need to write one big fat check in order to get teams like that into this country. And unfortunately, the Canadian Soccer Association, coming out of COVID, they were put in a really tough spot. And I think that you need to understand that they need to be a little bit careful about where they're spending their dollars right now. With considerations to youth programs, women's programs, the men's national team, a lot of tournaments upcoming this summer. Egypt probably fit the price in terms of a profile of a team that would be most like playing Morocco. That's what it comes down to. The September window, all kinds of pressures now on the CSA to deliver top nations that are going to replicate games against Belgium and Croatia. But that's going to come in September. And that's easier to do if you have a European-based camp, which I believe that they will have. So Egypt, you could have gone a North African country like Tunisia, Algeria, a country like that. They landed on Egypt because they were probably the right price and a right team that kind of tactically would provide some kind of test. Critically, it should be noted, Iran is playing in the same group as the United States as well. Who are the United States playing a friendly against? Morocco.
Yeah.
Berhalter and Herdman have traded notes. They've been in conversation about games within CONCACAF. There needs to be some kind of arrangement here as well in terms of how that communication go and how that can benefit both countries going into the World Cup. So this isn't a case of just throwing, a dart against a dartboard and landing on a nation saying, okay, we're going to play them. There's a process that plays out, financial considerations, location, as well as preparation. And in those terms, a match like this ticks all the boxes. Just wanted to add one other thing. Like Ollie, you were mentioning about the Iranian players, not representing the political might of a country. A player that we all know, one of the nicest people that you will ever meet, Steven Beitashour, won an MLS Cup with Toronto FC. Played for Vancouver Whitecaps. He's a former Iranian national player. He was at the 2014 World Cup where they pushed Argentina to the limits. Like, in no way do I look at him representing the country from an international soccer perspective and think about this tragedy. I just don't. That's me personally. Again, this is an unspeakable tragedy, and political pressure should be put on our government to rectify this situation in terms of what happened to Canadian citizens at the hands of the Iranian guard. I understand all that. But what happens on the field in between these teams, it might be a different case. People might not want to hear this, but I do believe that there will be people from Iranian backgrounds in BC Place cheering on the Iranian national team for this game. People outside of individuals who suffered tragedy or who are appalled from a political perspective, which I absolutely understand. Thankfully, in this country, we accept dissenting views. I expect there will be some kind of protest or protests that are planned. And that's part of what our country is all about, right? Freedom to protest, freedom of expression. And our hearts do go out to the individuals that have been involved. And I think this is a delicate situation. And going forward, I think this is a big learning moment for the Canadian Association in all sports in this country, where the political climate becomes more difficult by the day. We're hosting the World Cup in 2026. What if North Korea? What if Russia? What if other nations who, there's some difficult situations end up playing in our country for that World Cup? None of these things are straightforward. All of these things are difficult. All of these things are nuanced. And I don't expect anyone to be completely aligned with decisions that are made accordingly.
Part of the push and pull when it comes to these types of conversations, and we've been having them, I would say probably for the last decade or so, is of course sport washing. And we're hearing this, the group of Canadian Iranian families who talk about that. Don't use sports to cover up atrocities of a country. And oftentimes when you are hosting a major sporting event, your skeletons in your closet get exposed. And without going into too much history, it happened in 2010 when Canada hosted the Olympics. How our treatment of Indigenous women, that came to light. When Russia hosted Olympics, World Cup, everything starts to get exposed. That is how our world works. And the push and pull is that you have a group who really, truly, strongly want to keep politics out of sport. And you have another group that says that's not how it works, because we've let too much go. We've let too much fly, and people get away with too much because of the pomp and circumstance of sport. So the existential question, of course, here, right, is, I think it's too simple to say, does politics belong in sports? I think we can all agree, just based on what's happening right now, it's there. And people will always make it there. And I just wonder where we go from here. is this a slippery slope? Like I said, every country has skeletons in their closet. So will Canada get rejected from participating in certain things because people say, well, your treatment, we just found hundreds and hundreds of unmarked graves of the Indigenous community. So, be careful sometimes too when you point fingers with dirty hands, right? Other countries, we know certain atrocities that go on there. Should sports governing bodies, Ollie, maybe have a political advisor if that's the case? Because sometimes, like I said, you become so narrow in your focus where you're just thinking of the sport. Do you need somebody to say, by the way, you might want to take this into consideration. I mean, is that where we're headed, or is that too slippery a slope for you?
It might be. It's such a difficult one, right? Because like I said earlier, that I still personally believe that when you put two teams or athletes from different countries on the same field, or whatever the sport is, you have them competing together. I still think that there's a lot of good that can come out of that, and that the athletes can show us a lot more of our similarities as people from different countries than differences, maybe a lot more than our politicians do at times. And so that can be a pretty powerful thing. And I think we've seen that throughout history. At the same time, I think it's inescapable at this point that the sports and international competitions are also being used for sports washing, as you mentioned, right? Like, you can look at the Qatar World Cup coming up, which Canada is going to participate in, and it's that, right? It's a country with a very troublesome human rights records that is going to host a major international tournament and have a pretty face put on it by the World Cup and by everything the World Cup represents. And so it's so difficult to to participate in international sport in this way in major competitions, and completely avoids that kind of thing, because ultimately it comes down to the organizing bodies, FIFA, the IOC, and the rest of it, which have shown that they don't always act in the way we would like them to act. So there's no easy answers here. I don't know I don't think there is a kind of catch-all solution as to how you kind of deal with these situations.
Yeah, we've had Olympics and World Cups in recent vintage. Russia, Olympics, World Cups, Olympics in China, both summer and winter, and we've had very publicly Canadians being held captive, imprisoned in China during those times. We still competed in these games. There are Canadians who play for PSG. They're run by the Qatari state. New York City FC. Like, all of these things are intertwined now. A lot of it based upon, in order to pay salaries, grow the sport, you go to the places with deep pockets, and a lot of money's coming from countries that want to be legitimized through these methodologies. I think we understand it. We're not naive to it, but when you're put in a situation where that's part of your livelihood, that's part of your being, then people are willing to sacrifice. It doesn't make it right. Absolutely, it doesn't. I'm not sure where things go from here. Athletes continue to use their platforms and speak out, more so than ever. You know, they support causes. I'm not sure if they necessarily speak out against a particular club or individual, or all of these athletes are going to the World Cup in Qatar. Canadian athletes chose to go to Olympic Games in various places as well. It's tough when athletes sacrifice their entire lives for athletic excellence to get to the pinnacle, which in this case for the Canadian men's national team is going to a World Cup. It's very difficult to suggest to someone to stand their moral ground and back out of something, because of these issues. Like, oftentimes the athlete will say, well, this is bigger than just me. It's bigger than the association. If something's going to be done, it needs to be done on a larger scale. So it's a difficult ask for athletes, and we put them in difficult positions. I saw that Lucas Cavallini was asked questions about Iran. Lucas Cavallini wants to score goals for the Canadian men's national team. I'm sure it's hard. His thoughts and prayers go out to everyone that has been implicated in a negative way by this absolute tragedy, and something that no one can justify. But when you ask Lucas Cavallini about something like this, what's he supposed to say? What's Lucas Cavallini supposed to do? I feel for him in a situation like that, because there's no right answer.
No, and I mean, I just went through this, to your point, with a lot of the Canadian athletes and the Beijing Olympics. My personal opinion is I think it's so unfair to put that on the shoulders of the athletes, which is why I asked.
Yeah.
When it comes to the sporting federations, IOC, right? International Olympic Committee, FIFA, like, is it time for them to make the proper choices so the athletes like a Lucas Cavallini doesn't have to answer those types of questions, right? It starts there, the decision making, where you're going to have certain games, who you're going to play. And I think we also have to recognize, because this was another, topic that came up, there are athletes who truly want to use their platforms to promote peace and to promote love. And there are others who just don't want to do it. Right. And just because there are some who do, it doesn't mean they all want to. Right. So this pressure of you better say something or stand up or take a stand. Not everyone wants to do that. This is where it starts to get very tricky. Right. Sport, just like life, is not black or white as much as we try to put it in a nice
Yeah, and
little box.
soccer's not the only sport that's dealing with this. Like these
No.
tennis tournaments that are trying that want to exclude or ban Russian athletes. Like, is that Russian athlete at fault? Should they be bearing the weight of the decision of of the nation? Like, Russian hockey players here. Do we then look at athletes from unfriendly or nations we have conflict or strife against and just don't allow them to compete in international events in this country? I just don't think any of these answers are straightforward. Again, they're all nuanced on a case by case basis, need to be treated accordingly. And
Mm.
honestly, the way that this is all played out, like this may have been a miscalculation or an oversight by the Canadian Soccer Association. We're in transition right now in terms of the leadership of that organization. Dr. Nick Bontis has told me in the past when he entered and joined the Canadian Soccer Association in 2020, during the pandemic, what struck him was how small it was. I'm of the belief that the Canadian Soccer Association is going through a restructure, and they're going to be hiring more jobs to occupy critical roles for this organization. And perhaps with a more robust organization, situations like this don't arise. I don't know if it was an oversight. I don't know. I'm purely speculating there, but the more professional and the stronger the structure is in any organization, situations like this, which could potentially create a spark, Andy, it generally doesn't even reach that point. It doesn't get to that point. So, although
Mhm.
there are absolute tactical reasons why you would play this game, potentially something like this could have been avoidable.
Yeah, I just lastly, just to add to that, I think that's an important point to make because, like, I think people sometimes from the outside who are maybe not familiar with soccer look at Canada Soccer and they imagine this like massive
Yeah.
organization that's almost like a government body and like super, tons of people in each position and so on. It's not. It's a very small organization right now. Canadian soccer, we know the women have had success for longer, but even that is still relatively recent in terms of their success on the international stage. So it's not a big organization, and you can see how something like this might not be maybe quite examined in the way it could be.
Mhm. I'm sure more information, more people will have comments on this and talk about this. I know that the wound is fresh. I think that's another reason why this has been brought up, gentlemen. This just happened in January of 2020. This is still very fresh. And I think the Canadian government has a lot of work to do to repair
Yes.
its relationship with the families of those 85 Canadians who were shot down in that plane. And that is why this is also still at the forefront because
Well, and Eddie, I was going to say that because Trudeau's comments reeked to me like he might have not been aware. Like this is a prime minister who visited both the men's and women's teams in recent months. So there's clearly a relationship there. This screamed to me maybe he wasn't aware of the situation. He has a lot of different things on his plate right now, and the last thing that he or the government would probably want is to have to now go on and try to push this Iranian agenda, which I firmly believe there's loose ends there. Absolutely, it hasn't been taken care of and dealt with to its fullest. That's something that now becomes more of a priority now that it's back in the spotlight. It's fresh, but since 2020, I mean, COVID, Russia, like inflate, like there's so many different things. The news cycle's been moving
Mhm.
at a lightning fast pace, right? So although it's fresh of the minds for a lot of people, for other people, holy crap, the
Mhm.
news cycle's gone in warp speed, and it seems like it happened quite some time ago. So it's probably not something that the government was thrilled about. The fact that now this is back in the public sphere,
Well, sure. That doesn't though negate that the pressure should still be put on them to
right?
rectify what happened. But
Hopefully, it does put
and
pressure
that's
on
why
them,
I think
right?
it was. That's why I do think, and I'm sure. Yeah, I'll just flat out say I think it was very unfair for the prime minister to just lay it all at the feet of Canada Soccer because Canada Soccer had to obviously go through certain steps that the government would have been fully aware of, and the government is the one that
Yeah.
ultimately grants the visas. So to say that's something Canada Soccer has to explain, pretty sure the Canadian government was part of that too. And I think
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that's just what's a little frustrating right now. So again, we can completely understand there is just so much here. I can't even properly wrap my head around it because it's so devastating when you hear the people talk about, losing family, losing a wife, losing children.
Horrible.
It's heartbreaking. I remember when that happened. I 100% remember when that happened and being completely devastated by it. So, that is something the Canadian government definitely has to answer for, and rectify for those 85 Canadians. It's difficult, obviously, to talk about that. And I'm sure we'll continue to discuss it as sport and politics continue to collide in this world and move forward.